The dawn came unhurriedly, as if respecting the mourning of a silent man. The sky descended in thick tears, washing the clay floors to try and console what human eyes refused to see. In the most forgotten corner of the village, where not even the dogs dared to bark anymore, was Zabiru. He was not shivering from the cold, although he was soaking wet. He did not sob, although everything inside him was in ruins. She just held her son, that piece of life wrapped in a threadbare cloth, as if holding the last thread of dignity. No one heard her footsteps leaving. No fight, not a word crossed, just a dense silence, followed by an absence that screamed louder than any discussion. On the threshold of the hut, a wet note was already beginning to unravel with the rain, but he didn't need to read it again. The phrase was already tattooed on his soul. I can't take it anymore. That was it. Unnamed. No excuse. No farewell. Zabiru has always been a man of few gestures, a wooden craftsman. He lovingly molded small figures for children and masks for festivals, but he almost never spoke of himself. He worked with dedication, returned home early, and looked at his wife with the same respect with which he looked at his tools, as something that is taken care of every day, without having to say much. And that's why it hurt the most, because the abandonment did not come with a fuss. He came like the blade hidden in a smile, like the sound of a drum that plays and no one dances, because the heart was broken before the music began. With each drop that fell, the earth sank a little deeper under Zabiru's feet, but he didn't move. He stood there, motionless, with a baby in his arms, waiting for someone to pass by, see, ask, extend a hand. But no one came, because in the village, when the rain falls, everyone locks themselves in their homes, and the abandoned man, alone with child in his arms, becomes invisible. But what no one knew that morning is that the sky did not cry by chance. He cried together, because sometimes the cry of heaven is the way that ancestors find to wash away the beginning of a story that will still be told for many generations. The next morning, the sun appeared unwillingly, as if it were also embarrassed by what had happened. Zabiru's hut, once inconspicuous, now looked like an open scar on the face of the village. The children, who once ran to see his dusty sculptures, began to deviate from the path. The mothers whispered among themselves, and some, when they saw him approaching with the boy tied to his back, pulled their daughters by the hand and locked the doors with exaggerated force. They said he was carrying bad luck. They said that where a woman runs away, the wind does not stop. They said it was better to avoid it. In that place, a man without a wife was like a roof without straw, unprotected, vulnerable, uncomfortable. They no longer called him to the community council. They no longer offered him pieces of meat on feast days. Neighbors began to treat him as an echo of something they didn't want to remember, as if his presence revealed the fear hidden in fragile marriages themselves. And the more he kept silent, the more the stories about him increased. Some said he beat his wife, others that he went crazy after his son was born. None of them knew anything. But in the absence of truth, the village preferred the poison of invention. And even so, the boy smiled. Whenever someone looked at him, even with hard eyes, even with disgust, he smiled. A big, innocent smile, as if nothing was wrong, as if there was still beauty in people. That bothered me. That was challenging. Because the smile of a hungry child on the lap of a rejected man is a mirror that many do not want to face. It is like a lit candle in the midst of collective mourning. It shows that darkness, no matter how hard it tries, never wins alone. Zabiru did not ask for help. He never begged. He only walked with firm steps, even though his feet sank into mud. But every simple gesture of his, carrying the boy in the cloth, sweeping in front of the hut, washing the clothes by the river, seemed an affront to the logic of that village. He did not bend. And it infuriated them more than any screaming, because where they expected to see ruin, they saw resistance, and where they wanted contempt, they found quiet dignity. The nights came slowly, as if they wanted to protect the boy for what the world did not yet understand. He slept against his father's chest, even when there was no fire burning, even when the wind came to the cracks in the wall like cold fingers looking for fear. And he didn't cry. He did not complain about the milk that was lacking or the clothes that did not warm up. It was as if that child knew from the womb that his mission was greater than comfort, as if his soul had come with memories of things that adults had forgotten. One day, as he passed the crossroads where the old healers used to sit, Zabiru stopped out of respect. One of the men that was blind, old as the trunk of the oldest baobab, with gray eyes that seemed to see inward rather than outward. He asked to hold the boy. Zabiru hesitated, but gave in, And it was only by touching the child that the old man murmured, as if remembering and not just predicting, This one was sent to remind the village of what it forgot. The phrase fell like a stone in a still lake. Zabira nodded his head, but said nothing. Inside, he doubted it. How could someone so small, so dependent, remind an entire village of anything? He himself barely remembered who he had been before he was left. How could we trust a prophecy spoken by a man who could not even see the face of the speaker? But that same night, while trying to sleep, Zabira noticed something. The boy caressed her face with his small hands, and in her eyes so wide they seemed to contain the sky, there was a calmness that did not match the pain they were experiencing. It was as if he knew how to wait, as if to say, without words, that all that had a purpose. From that day on, Zabira began to listen more, not with the ears, but with the heart. And the more I listened, the more I realized that that boy's laughter was not just joy. It was a calling, a reminder, an ancestral drum that still beat, even when everyone thought the song was over. It was a time of drought, and hunger was beginning to show its teeth. Zabiru's palms were already wounded from so much carving, even without customers, even without quality wood. But that day, he gathered what he had managed to mold with remains of trunks, small figures of oryxes, animals, and a drum carved with details of sawdade, and went to the village square. He carried in his eyes the courage of someone who had nothing left to lose. The square was busy. Women sold fresh leaves, men discussed the price of yams, and children ran among the gourds of water. Zabiru approached a group that was talking around a basket of cassava. With humility, he showed his pieces and offered in exchange food for art. Is that it? He did not ask for charity. He asked for respect. The answer came with laughter. First one, then another, until everyone laughed as if they had heard an absurd joke. One of the men stood up, looked at the sculpture, spat on the ground, and said, "Go back to the rain, artist of nothing." It was as if there, in front of everyone, they had taken away the little honor he still had left. Zabira did not respond. He just picked up his pieces and walked back, feeling the looks on his back like daggers. But what he didn't see was a curtain of leaves swaying gently behind the pepper stand. And there, with attentive eyes, a woman watched. She didn't laugh. He did not mock. He just remained silent, as if recognizing a wound that also bled. His feet moved in the same direction as Zabiru, but he didn't notice. She followed him in silence, not out of curiosity, but by memory, because there are pains that awaken in other people what the village tries to forget. Compassion. That night, when Zabiru returned home and put the boy to sleep, he found something on the threshold of the hut. A clay bowl, still hot, with yam soup and baobab leaves. No tickets, no explanation, only care, served in silence. And in the heat of that soup, something ignited inside him. It wasn't just gratitude. It was faith rising, like an ember that refuses to go out, even in the rain. The next morning, the clay bowl had been taken. But in the same place, there was dry firewood, carefully piled up. And the next day, a thick, clean piece of fabric, folded as a discreet offering. Zabira did not ask where they came from. He only received, with the reverence of someone who understands that there are gifts that do not come from hands, but from hearts guided by ancestors. With wood, he sculpted again, not to sell, not out of hunger, but because something inside him called for expression, as if the silence that inhabited his chest needed to take shape in the figures that came out of his hands. It started with a sewn-in mouth mask, then a bird with broken wings, and finally, a woman kneeling, holding in her arms something invisible like a secret. It was art that cried together. The children, curious, began to approach. First they came hidden, peering through the cracks in the hut. Then they sat around, pretending to play with stones, but listening to each hammer strike with watchful eyes. Zabira didn't say much, but it did. Each sculpture was a teaching. Each gesture with the sandpaper, an invitation to silence. And little by little, without realizing it, the little ones learned more than art. They learned to see. One day, one of the boys tried to carve a stone. It didn't look pretty, but Zabiru smiled, and that smile was a kind of approval that many of these young men had never known. He didn't charge. He didn't demand it. He just planted, as if trusting in the rain. And the rain came. More children came. Parents came watching from afar. Shy smiles came where there was contempt before. It all started with a bowl of soup, a gesture that seemed small, but the sky registered it. Because the sky, the one who had already cried along with Zabiru, now watched in silence and smiled. because I knew something was being born. Not fast, not with fanfare, but the way sacred things are born, slowly, deeply, and with roots that no one pulls out. Time passed as if whispering hope without promising haste. The boy grew, and with him also grew the dignity of Zabiru. The hut, once empty, now exuded new wood, childlike voices, and the smell of burning coal. There was color on the walls, not paint, but drawings scratched with charcoal, as if the house itself were beginning to dream again. The village, little by little, began to remember that a man alone is not synonymous with failure, and that the firmness with which he takes care of a child is also a form of prayer. It was at this time of quiet beginning that a merchant arrived from the big city. He wore starched clothes, shiny shoes, and words as sweet as poison honey. He visited the village saying he was looking for forgotten talents. He would promise golden bridges between the village and the modern world. Someone showed Zabiru's sculpture. He came to the hut, looked with the eyes of one who measures, and said, "These pieces can be worth a lot. You have talent, but it needs to look less poor." Zabiru listened in silence. The man went on, offering a partnership. He would sell the works in the capital. They would make a profit, visibility. But there was one requirement. No one wants to see a dirty baby among pretty goods. Leave the boy with someone, even if it's just for a few days. The phrase remained in the air like thick smoke. Zabiru looked at his son, who was playing with a piece of wood on the floor. Those eyes, which had always smiled, now just watched, as if they were waiting for the choice. Inside, Zabiru was divided. He thought about everything he could do with the money. He thought about the food, the clothes, the possibility of rebuilding his dignity with applause, and not just with silence, but something in his chest hurt, an old, deep pain that reminded me of the cold of the early morning of the match. He thought, if I leave him now, what kind of sculpture do I become? It was the child's gaze that saved him. He said nothing, but there was a truth here that no merchant could buy. So, firmly, he refused. The man laughed, mocked, called him naive. He left, and he took with him the promise of easy wealth. That night, Zabiru lit the fire more calmly. She sat with her son on her lap, as she had done since the first day, and there, between the crackling of the wood and the distant sound of the drums, he whispered a proverb learned from his grandfather. What is given in exchange for one's own soul will one day be charged with interest. And the boy smiled, once again, as if confirming that the father made the right choice. There was a good silence in the village, a silence that did not come from fear, but from peace. Children learned to sculpt. Adults began to respect Zabiru's space, and even the elders, once so far away, began to wave discreetly when they crossed his path. It was as if, without fanfare, the village was slowly being healed, not by speech, but by presence, for the constancy of a man who did not scream, but remained, by the light of a child who did not stop smiling, even without knowing the world deserved that smile. But the calm, sometimes, is just a harbinger of the test. On a muggy afternoon, when the sky seemed to hold its breath, the smoke rose, first faint, then thick. It started on the side of the school, a straw and clay structure where the little ones learned letters and stories, and soon spread like fire in dry bush. The flames grew hungry, devouring walls, notebooks, dreams, and no one saw it, no one except him. Nuru, the boy who was once left in the rain, now 5 years old, ran through the village with his eyes wide and his bare feet burning on the hot ground. He screamed incessantly. He knocked on doors. He called names. His thin, insistent voice pierced fear. And it was this voice that woke up the adults. It was this cry that saved lives, because there were children inside the school, and there was still time to take them out. Men ran with buckets. Women formed rows of water, and the elders helped as they could. The fire did not forgive the walls, but it did not take anyone. At the end of the day, amidst ashes and smoke, the village realized it was a boy, the same one who smiled when everyone ignored him, who prevented the tragedy. He was the one who saw what others did not see. He was the one who screamed when everyone was sleeping. And there, in the midst of the rubble, someone remembered. Someone whispered, "He's always been smiling, even when no one saw him." And at that moment, something broke and mended itself at the same time in the collective heart of the village. A memory, a shame, a gratitude, all together, all mixed with the soot that still hung in the air. Because sometimes it is necessary to lose what has been built to see the value of those who have ignored themselves. And sometimes salvation comes precisely from the one who was once seen as a curse. The fire left deep marks on the earth, but awakened something even stronger in hearts. The village, which had previously turned its face, now turned its eyes to the boy with a mixture of respect and regret. The same boy who ran alone among the flames was the one who, for years, was ignored in the fairs, avoided in the squares, silenced in the conversation circle. Now, everyone knew his name, Nuru, he that bringeth light. The name chosen by Zabiru in the solitude of the early morning now echoed in the songs of gratitude. With everyone's help, a new school was built, this time with joined hands, strong clay, a firm roof, and when the day of the inauguration came, the elders decided it would be called Nuru School, not out of vanity, but for justice, because there were names that needed to be written so that the wounds would finally heal. And that day, under the sound of drums and clapping, Zabiru did not cry. He just closed his eyes for a moment, as if silently thanking everything he couldn't say before. Now he was respected, not because he asked, nor because he shouted, but because he stood up when everything said to fall, because he chose his son the truth, the wood, and the silence, even when everything around him called him to give up. His name came to be mentioned with reverence, and his cabin, once lonely, became a meeting point for those who wanted to learn more than sculpture. Learn not to give up. The lady who had left a bowl of soup on the days of famine was also honored. He gained a sculpture bench in the ancestral temple, the same bench where those who, in life, had done good without requiring witnesses sat. It was the first time that someone without a title, without wealth, received such a gesture. But everyone knew she deserved it, because she saw it when no one saw it. And he sowed without knowing that he would change a harvest of an entire generation. Years later, on an unexpected morning, the woman who had left Zabiru returned. Time had passed by like a river in stone, shaping, erasing edges, but leaving marks. She entered the village with slow steps and empty eyes, hoping perhaps to find what she left behind. But he found another kind of silence, a silence that does not hurt, but does not bend, a silence of someone who forgives, but does not return. Zabiru received her with a serene look. Nuru, on the side, reached out politely. There was no hurt, but there was also no more room for what was left by choice. She cried, and he was gone again. But this time, taking what I had not understood before, that love, when abandoned, is reborn in other form, firmer, deeper, more true. It rained that night, not like before, with fury, with abandon, with pain. It rained as a blessing, like nostalgia, watering the land that was now flourishing. Zabiru left the hut in silence, sat under the ancient tree near the temple, and let the water run down his face as if receiving a late baptism. Nuru, now with his eyes full of the world and the firm body of someone who knew where he came from, sat next to his father. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to, because sometimes the sky wets those who need to flourish. And the rain that one day brought him to his knees now watered the roots of his faith. He understood at last that he had not been abandoned. He had been separated, like the grains that are set aside before harvesting, like the blacksmiths who shape iron in the hottest fire, because they know that something will come out of it that does not break. Zabiru did not become a hero by miracle, nor for revenge. It became a symbol because it chose to remain, because in the face of contempt, he chose to teach. In the face of hunger, he shaped beauty. Faced with the opportunity to sell his soul, he hugged his son. And in the face of injustice, he sowed faith, not the faith of the crowded temples, but the faith that wakes up early, washes its face, and believes again. Even after being left in the rain, the village has changed, not by decree, not for punishment, but because he saw a man rise again in silence, because he saw a child smile even when everything seemed dark, because he understood finally that the invisible sustains the visible, that there are values that do not fit into words, but shape destinies, and that love, the true one, does not take revenge. It transforms. What about you? How many times has your pain actually been the beginning of an invisible transformation? Perhaps, like Zabiru, you too have been set apart, not be forgotten, but to be remembered. Perhaps the rain that wet you did not come to destroy, but to prepare the soil where something even greater will flourish. Because what is born of pain, when watered by courage and care, becomes a strong root, one of those that sustain not only a life, but an entire village. If this story spoke to you, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, leave your like, and share it with those who need a breath of hope. Sometimes a simple gesture can change someone's destiny.